What is going on? This is MBTI Exposed, working with MBTI Rationals once again. And in this episode, we will be talking about the 4 sides of the mind in 4 sides dynamic. If you haven't watched the previous episode, I would want you to watch that previous episode before. Okay, so let's jump right into it. The first side of the mind is the conscious. And Jung said that it provides a direction for the self. If you think about it, it's kind of the tip of the spear. If you see the whole human psyche as a spear, right? So it's got the head, the body. The ego is the tip of the spear. The next part in this model of 4 sides dynamic is the shadow. All the cognitive functions lie within the first 2 parts of the mind, the ego and the unconscious. So, this is technically all you need to know, but it's not. One thing that I forgot to mention is that these in parentheses are what we used last episode. So, like I said, if you want to actually have a more clearer perception and understanding of what's going on, please watch the last episode. The third part of the mind that we'll be going over is the subconscious. This is fairly simple, right? The subconscious in 4 sides dynamic is the first part to develop when it comes to developing the self as a whole. The subconscious is very important. Development in the subconscious lies within development of the inferior function, which is technically what you're afraid of. It's all about fear. And then last, but certainly not least, is the superego. The superego is a very, very important part of the psyche. It's where the deepest, darkest desires, wants, thoughts, feelings, whatever you could think of within a person lie. So I just put the white line on the board to show what we are aware of and what we're not aware of. We're aware of what's going on in our ego. And we're also aware of what's going on in our subconscious. But we're not aware of what's going on in our superego and our shadow. Wouldn't it be great to know our deepest, darkest secret about ourselves? Wouldn't it? Something that the shadow and the superego are holding against your ego as a person. Wouldn't that be great to know? Well, following this model and following the 8 cognitive functions, you can know. If you saw the last video, you may be asking yourself, where's the persona on this model? Well, this is actually yourself. Just as Jung says, the persona is 2-dimensional. It's not 3-dimensional. It's not actually who you are. Okay, so as you can see here, I wrote out all the functions of the ego. The first function is the hero. Most of the time it's called the primary function. That's what Jung calls it, and that's what most people call it. But we call it the hero because the name indicates the behavior of that function within your psyche. It's one thing to remember. So hero is the hero. It's the first function, the primary function. It has the most entitlement issues. What I mean by entitlement issues, it thinks that it can do whatever it wants, get away with anything. So let's take an example. Let's take an ISTP. ISTPs have TI hero, introverted thinking. They think that they are the smartest people to walk the earth to an extent. Since introverted thinking, TI, is all about logic, ISTPs automatically think that everything that they think is logical, completely logical. Most cases, that's not true. Although ISTPs are very smart people. The next function in this cognitive stack, and everybody's cognitive stack, is the parent. And the parent is where one's responsibility lies. It's parental. Think about the parent being the parent of the ego itself. And obviously, what brings us right into our next thing, which is the child, and we'll get to that soon. So let's take an ENTJ. ENTJs have introverted intuition parent. Introverted intuition parent is all about what they desire and the way they see their future. ENTJs, for the most part, especially mature ones, always know what they want. The next function is the child function. And the child function is where one's divinity lies. It's their most pure function, their most pure felt function. Let's take an ENTP. This is a really good one. ENTPs have extroverted feeling child. So when they feel somebody's feelings, right, because that's the way it works, extroverted feeling tries to find introverted feeling. And when it feels or tries to feel other people's feelings, it's their most pure felt feeling. So it hits them hard, or it can hit them the least. It's very interesting the way the child function works. The child function is all over the place, just like a child. It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth. It's a hit and miss. Lastly is the inferior. And the inferior is the most important function in the ego itself. The inferior is where your fear lies. It's where your insecurity lies. So here's another example. ESFPs. ESFPs have NI inferior. Remember we talked about the ENTJs having NI parent, always being responsible and knowing what they want? Not so much for ESFPs. ESFPs have NI inferior, which says they're scared about wanting the wrong things. Like I said, it is vitally important to develop that inferior function. Whatever your inferior function is, which we'll talk about very soon, you need to get that up to avoid what? To avoid life crises. That is wrapping up the ego really quick. So, hero, parent, child, inferior. And one thing you need to remember is that the name indicates the attitude. As we move into the shadow and work on the 4 bottom cognitive functions, a very, very important thing to keep in mind is that the ego is actually positively charged. And guess what? Positive can't exist without negative. Say it, negative. I know you're gonna say it, negative, okay? Positive and negative in science actually attract to each other, which is very interesting. So let's look at the way this works. So you have a hero, right? But a hero can't exist without what? A villain or a problem. The villain is where somebody's worry lies. So here's another example. INFJs have introverted intuition hero, NI. So with that being said, they have to be an E villain. Extroverted intuition villain. Introverted, extroverted. That being said, INFJs with extroverted intuition villain, extroverted intuition itself is all about seeing the short-term future in all the possibilities. So what they do is they assume and make bad decisions because they're worried that other people have bad intentions. We just talked about the parent function, and the parent can't exist without criticism. Think about it like this. There's a child that's acting up at a park, and they're with their parent, right? So what happens is other parents start criticizing that parent for not taking care of their child. Now you're starting to see the dynamics of this. Here's an example. ESFJs have extroverted sensing critic, meaning if their parent, which is introverted sensing, is not receiving a good experience, they will go crazy on you. They'll get really lashy, and they'll be very avoidant. Extroverted sensing critic is very, and for ESFJs is avoidant. Put this down in your notes. I'm kidding. When you're around an ESFJ, make sure that you are always clean, cut, and tidy. And an ESTJ. That'll drive an ESTJ crazy. Like dirty dishes in the kitchen or dirty floor. Ooh! You ever be around an ESFJ with a dirty floor? I've done that. And they lost it on me. The child can't exist without what? The trickster. Being tricked. Children, since they're so divine, and since they feel and they think and they desire so purely, what happens is they end up being tricked. And so you see the orbit of these two parts of the mind just working together. That's how the trickster comes into play. The trickster tricks the child into doing something, whatever that may be. Let's take an ISFJ. ISFJs have TI child, okay? Introverted thinking child, logical child. Now, they have TE trickster, meaning it can be difficult for them to organize things and get thoughts together and do research. It could be difficult for them. But mature ones, yes, they can. Okay, this one is fun. I love, this is my favorite orbit. The inferior with the demon. Woo! Okay, let's talk about my personal type because I'm so personal and selfish, right? I have introverted intuition inferior, okay? And what that means is that sometimes it's difficult for me to decide on what I want in things. And if I feel like my freedom of choice is being taken away, because introverted intuition is all about freedom of choice. If I feel like my freedom of choice is being taken away, guess what happens? Extroverted intuition demon comes out and takes away everybody's freedom of choice. And that is true for all the types. Here's another example. Let's take an INTJ. INTJs have extroverted sensing inferior. Extroverted sensing inferior is all about, or just extroverted sensing itself is about giving people and sharing good experiences with people. So what happens is when the INFJ feels like they're not performing right, what happens is they self-indulge in their introverted sensing demon and they're like, oh, I'm not worth it, blah, 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 blah. And they start, drinking, doing drugs, and eating a bunch of food, and they just lose themselves. The demon is a path to destruction. And if the demon is an extroverted function, then it'll destroy everybody else and themselves. Whereas if it's an introverted function, they will destroy themselves first. And if they're affiliative, which all these functions are affiliative to an extent, they will destroy all those people that are around them. Okay, that was part 1 of the 4 sides of the mind. In part 2, we're going to be discussing these. And this is where it's going to get really interesting. This is MBTI Exposed with an X, working with MBTI Rationals. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you in part 2. Peace.